Okay, Boker Tov to everybody. We learned Ilu Nishmat Avigdor Chai Abram Ben Racholea Meir Tzvi Nishama She'evan Aliyah. I chose today specifically to do this only on Zoom and not in person because I need to put a few things on the screen. We are about to learn one Mishnah out of three that Hillel, as in Hillel and Shammai, that Hillel said. And it's really impossible to get into the Mishnayot of Hillel and Shammai without really learning about them. It's critically important. It's always important, as we've done a little bit of background on some of the other Tanaim that came before, and to understand how that informed what they said in the Mishnayot, but especially when it comes to Hillel and Shammai. So what I have to do is kind of jump right into the, let me put on the screen, down to here. This is the Mishnah we're at right now. I'm going to read it, translate it, and then I'm going to go back and give you some background, and we're going to read some stories. So the stories that come from the Gemara is one or two for sure, maybe all of them, but chances are there's going to be at least one new story here. And we have to, this will help us understand the difference between these two men. So this is the next Mishnah. Hillel v'Shammai kiblu mehem. Hillel and Shammai received from them, but we know the last couple Mishnayot were Shmaya Navtalon. So Shmaya Navtalon were their Rabbanim. In addition to that, you remember the story we left off with last time was where Hillel went on Rosh Hagag, he went on the rooftop of the Beit Midrash of Shmaya Navtalon. And I'm not going to go back to the whole story again, but we saw that Hillel was living a life, pretty poor life at that moment, not spiritually, just he didn't have any money. But we really didn't meet Shammai yet, which we will today. So it says, Hillel v'Shammai kiblu mehem. Hillel omer, Havei mi talmidav shel Aharon. You should be from the students of Aharon. What does that mean? What was the shining, stellar quality of Aharon? Ohev shalom. This is the Aharon Kohen, brother of Moshe Rabbeinu. Ohev shalom. You should love peace. V'rodev shalom. You should chase after peace. Ohev et habiriot. You should love humanity. You should love people. Torah, and you should bring them closer to Torah. Obviously, we're talking about the Jews. Okay, very nice. And we have, let's say, this is Mishnah Yud Bet, which is number 12, Mishnah Yud Gimel, 13, and Mishnah Yud Daled, number 14, are three Mishnayot in a row in which Hillel is quoted. We're going to focus right now, not the next one, but the next one after that. The third Mishnah is probably one of the most famous lines in all of Pirke Avot, if I'm not for myself. We'll get to there. Right now, what we need to do is to understand where this comes from. Hillel, also known as Hillel Hazaken, Hillel the Elder, holds a very prominent position in Jewish history. And to have it boiled down to just these lines of shalom, it sounds like this entire Mishnah is about the concept of peace and Torah. So, okay, let's take right now I'm going to take it off the screen share for a couple of minutes. Let's talk a little bit about these two individuals and their background. Let's put it first into context. Hillel is born in Babylonia, eventually moves to Israel. We're talking now about a century, like 100 years before the Common Era, approximately. And he moves to Israel. He studies there. He actually has a job. He has a job as a woodcutter. We will see in a few minutes that Shammai also had a job. Shammai had a job as a builder. We tend to think of these people in their ivory towers, and as they sat and learned Torah, they learned a tremendous amount of Torah, and they promulgated a tremendous amount of Torah. They also worked. They had jobs. So again, Hillel is born in Bavel. He moves to Israel and becomes one of the most influential forces in Jewish history, truthfully. He's also known for his demeanor, kind, very caring, concern for humanity in general, not just the Jewish people, but especially the Jewish people, always very involved in what we would nowadays call the social justice issues. Hillel and his descendants established what we know as Beit Hillel, which we talked a little bit about last time, which are the academies or the schools that followed his train of thought and his way of learning. And they themselves became leaders in the Jewish people. We know that his friendly adversary, let's say it like that, was a man named Shammai. Shammai has a different reputation. First of all, he's born in Israel. He's born and raised in Israel. He was, as I say, he was a builder. He actually had a trade, but he was also known, whereas Hillel was known for his more loving, compassionate, and kind, and his worldview was much more embracing. Shammai was known as being very strict and very cold. I'm not going to get into it, but if you have any time you want to go look online sometime, look up what the Arizal says about the differences about Hillel and Shammai and how there's a place for both of them. One in this world and one will be Bezrat Hashem Yimot HaMashiach. But that's not for our discussion now. Both of them lived at the time of King Herod. For those of you who joined the Jewish history class, you'll know that I mentioned Herod. Today is what, Thursday? I mentioned Tuesday night. We're going to talk a little bit about Herod in the Jewish history class, and of course, we're going to talk about Hillel and Shammai as well. But it's during the time of Herod's rule of Israel. Herod, if you're not sure, built the main base of the wall, the retaining wall, which we still have left, is the Kotel HaMaravi, and other parts, of course. He rebuilt the Beit HaMikdash after the Jews made an attempt. He rebuilt it. He built the base, the bottom part of Me'arat HaMachpelah. He built the Herodion. So all these, Herod was known as also as Herod the Builder. Very interesting individual. And it's during the time of the Roman occupation of Israel is when Hillel and Shammai come on the scene. And that's critically important. This is not just, yes, it's Jewish history also, but it's also important to understand this next couple of Mishnayot. Why is that the case? Because Shammai was very concerned about something. His goal was to do whatever he could to distance the Jews from the Romans. When we say that they were occupying Israel, it didn't mean just that the Jews had to pay taxes. It meant that they were physically here. They were here on as they say, boots on the ground. And Shammai was concerned that the Jews had too much interaction with the Romans, that the Jewish community itself would become weakened, and there'd be all kinds of religious problems, all kinds of moral problems. And that leads to a lot of his perspective of his strictness and how he paskins halacha, he comes to decisions in halacha. That view was not shared by Hillel. Hillel did not have that fear, and he was much more what we would call today more liberal in his approach to halacha. He was, of course, Hillel was the more popular one. He became the leader of he became the Nasi, and Shammai the Av Beit Din. The funny thing is that we know that they had disputes in halacha. We know that. They themselves didn't have a tremendous amount of disputes that are recorded, but it's their students. Remember, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, their students who had these arguments. The Gemara records over 300 differences of opinion in halacha. I mentioned last week that one of the beautiful things about this was that in spite of the fact that they had such tremendous agreements, both in terms of kosher and treif and in other areas, they also disagreed when it came to rules having to do with marriage and divorce and tuman tahara, ritual purity and impurity. And you would think that they would say, okay, you guys can't marry each other. You can't intermarry between the two people who follow different approaches in halacha. And the Gemara tells us, Mishne, lo nimneu. They didn't prevent themselves. They didn't stop themselves from marrying one group of people from Shammai to a group of people from Hillel. There was not a problem, which also, of course, shows us the ultimate avat chinam. Generally speaking, the ruling of the Gemara goes like Beit Hillel. And in certain, again, I did this, I mentioned this also off the top of my head last week. I think it's 18 cases where it goes like Beit Shammai and the rest goes like Beit Hillel. And it's also very intertwined into the rulings of excuse me, of Hillel, his welfare, his love for the welfare of people, his concern for the welfare of their cases of an aguna, for example, has brought a woman who's been left not knowing if her husband's alive or not, the way that he dealt with that case. But again, it's important to understand, I just want to repeat this, that in these next three Mishnayot, and then when we get into Shammai, the Mishnah after that, we have to keep in the back of our heads the historical context, that the Romans are there. Shammai is very concerned about the potential cross-migration and the potential cross-pollination, what could happen to the Jews if they were too close to the Romans. And again, that Hillel was not too concerned about that. So what I want to do is I want to go back to the screen share. I want to show you I'm going to go through a couple of stories. One that I put on the screen. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but okay. So most of you are familiar with the famous story about teaching the one person who wants to become a Jew by teaching Torah, asking Hillel to teach him the whole Torah on one leg. We're going to get to that, and most people remember only part of the story, which is very interesting because it's a different story. Tanu Rabbanan, the Gemara tells us as follows: the rabbis taught. Let me make it bigger so you can see it better. Move it up. Tanu Rabbanan, Maaseh benochi echad sheba lifnei Shammai. There's a story that's told about a non-Jew who comes to Shammai. Amar lo, he said to Shammai, Kama Torot yesh lachem? How many Torahs do you have? Amar lo shtayim. We have two. Torah shebichtav, Torah shebe'al peh. He said we have the written law and we have the oral law. But keep in mind again, this is still a generation or two. I guess it's more than that because you're talking approximately year, let's say 50 BCE. And the Mishne is not written down to about 200, about a couple hundred years before any Torah Shebe'al Peh is written down. Amar lo, shebichtav ani ma'amincha, shebe'al peh ani ma'amincha. He said, look, I'm willing to accept and believe in the Torah Shebichtav, but not the Torah Shebe'al Peh, not the verbal, the oral law. Gaireni, convert me. I want you to convert me, my dear Shammai, on the condition that you will teach me all the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah. Ga'arbo, he made this face at him. He castigated him, and with very stern look, and he basically threw him out of his house. He came before Hillel, Gaire, so Hillel converted him. Now we have to understand that Jews don't go out of their way to try to convert. The person we know tries to convert. We know that the idea is we try to dissuade them, and when we see that the person is sincere, and we'll do everything we can to welcome them to the fold. And especially after they have gone through Giyur, if they've gone through conversion, there's no difference between a ger and a person who's born Jewish. So they come before Hillel, and he converts this guy. Yom HaKama, on the first day, Amar lo. So he starts teaching him from the beginning, Aleph Bet Gimel Dalet. So he showed him what an Aleph Bet Gimel Dalet is. L'machar, apichle. The next day, what did Hillel do? He reversed the order. Amar lo, wait a minute. I'm confused. You just taught me that this is an aleph and this is a bet, this is a gimel, this is a dalet, and now you're telling me what you called yesterday an aleph, you're calling it a dalet, and he what's going on here? Amar lo. So he said back. Hillel said to the ger, Lava li didi kasamacht. Didn't you rely on me yesterday to tell you what the rules were, that this was an aleph and this was a bet? You have to also rely on me for the verbal part. Now, what is he trying? He's playing a little game with him. He says it's not possible to have something that's written and have only the knowledge of what's written in front of you without understanding that there's something that goes along with it. Again, there's a whole discussion what this exactly the Gemara means, but his point of Hillel was that Shammai just gets rid of him. He dismisses him out of hand. I'm not going to teach you just Torah Shebichtav. There's two Torah, there's two parts. You need to know both. Hillel, on the other hand, says, no, Shkoyach, you want to come join us? Here's the deal. Come on, I'll convert you. He starts teaching him literally from the beginning. And then Toch Kedei, while he's doing it, he explains to him in a very beautiful way, in a kind way, that you have to also understand there's a Torah Shebe'al Peh, there's a verbal way. For example, if I were to say we're going to teach English. Now, English is made up of an amalgam of many, many languages. For some of you who have a little bit of knowledge of history and language, you know the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. It's the beginning of the English language. Can't say beginning because I don't know for a fact. It's the early part of the English language, which eventually we would not recognize the language spoken back then for the most part. And if I were to say to you that a G is pronounced like a G, and then the next day I tell you it doesn't have any sound, you're just like, what are you talking about? Yeah, because if you have the word go, it's a G sound. If you have the word night, it's no sound. It's silent. So what's the G there for? Well, it comes from the German, Nacht. The GH sound is the Ch sound, which it didn't have. It did have sort of original. So again, there's what's called this the Havdil, Torah Shebe'al Peh. There's the oral law of the language. So he says, just like that, you have to understand there's an oral law when it comes to Torah. Another story of a non-Jew that came to Shammai. Amar lo, he said to him, I want you to teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one leg. What did he do? He had in his hand, remember I told you before that Shammai was a builder. He had in his hand what we would call today a measuring stick, and he hit him with it, and he threw him out of the house. That's kind of weird, right? So he comes before Hillel, who converts him. Amarlo, he said to this ger, it's actually missing a word. Gemara says, "My da'alach alach what you don't want to have happen to you, don't do to your friend," which is the flip side of he said to him, Zoi kol Torah kula, this is the whole Torah. Vidach perushahu, the rest is just commentary. Zil Gemara, go and finish it on your own. So we have to understand now. Usually, this story taken on face value is almost shocking. When you talk about a man like Shammai, he wasn't some guy who just sits at the side of the road and just gets angry at everybody. He was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He was a gadol b'Israel. He and Hillel, as I said, are contemporaries. So what does it mean? He hits him with this measuring stick. So I saw a very nice commentary like this. And again, most people know the story like this, the surface story. But I saw a very nice commentary. What does a builder do? A builder takes things and puts them together. You can't just take a cinder block, and say, I now have a house. You have a cinder block. That's all you have. So what do you do to build? You have to build things. You take multiple parts and you put it together. He is trying to intimate to this guy, to this person who wants to convert, according to this commentary I saw, you cannot tell me that I can teach you all of Torah on one leg, because the way to do that means I'm only going to basically tell you one thing. I'm not going to have a chance to tell you everything. And you can't approach Torah from that perspective. You have to understand Torah is made up of multiple things. You have to build one thing on top of another. Hillel, on the other hand, said we can start small and we can grow from there. He said we're going to start from the basic number one thing, and that is which is the positive way of saying, or what you don't want to have to you, you shouldn't do to your friend. Now we can also understand the context of why Hillel says this. Remember, I was saying to you before that what he is very well known for is his love for the Jewish people, his love for humanity in general. And the first step, according to Hillel, is how you treat somebody else. Where's that come from? Not just the but also the aphorism that we say, Derech Eretz Kodma Torah, which we will come to eventually. Derech Eretz, how you treat people, comes before Torah. What does that mean? I've used this example before. You're on a flight overseas. Some guy takes out his talus, he puts it on, and he whips it around his head to make a bracha. And while he does that, he smacks somebody who's asleep, right, with his the tzitzit. Well, he's very, very makbid. He's going to make sure he does that talit the right way, not taking anybody into consideration. And he's trying to keep the Torah, the mitzvah of that, but he's forgetting the concept of derech eretz. You can't do something that's going to infringe on somebody else's kavod, their respect, their honor, whatever it might be. So that comes first. So it means you're going to have to be a little bit more careful and put it over your shoulder just a little bit instead of whipping it around your neck like you might do in a shul, which you also shouldn't do if you're near somebody. Okay, so derech eretz kodma Torah. So this is Hillel's approach, and this is what he's trying to get across to the ger, to the person who's trying to convert. Now, there's another story which is less known, and this is a fascinating story that, again, not only shows the differences of their personalities, but it also shows the greatness of Hillel as far as how he respected people. Interestingly enough, one of the things I didn't mention before is that the story of come and convert me while I stand on one foot takes place, as it does in this following story, Erev Shabbat. So picture your own home, Erev Shabbat. Imagine you're going to take a shower. You're getting ready for Shabbat. Some guy's coming to Hakia China, comes knocking on your door. Hey, it's me, Steve Christensen, your next door neighbor. and I want you to convert me while I stand on one leg. What's on one leg? Come back to me on Sunday. Come back to me on Monday. I'm busy right now. I'm getting ready for Shabbat. That would be a normal response. That's not a matter of a Shammai Hillel. Yes, we're getting ready for Shabbat. It's not the appropriate time. And yet, Hillel takes the time to talk to this man, give him this one aphorism, and says, we'll talk. Second story. Tano Rabbanan. This is Gemara in Shabbat. Our rabbis taught, Lo lam yeh adam anvinatan kehillel. A person should always be a person who is it's not a really great translation, someone who is humble like Hillel. Let's just use that word right now. Kapdan kishamai. And you shouldn't be like very makpid. You shouldn't, again, there's the, in English, the word for a kapdan is very exacting. Like, you oh my gosh, you stood in this spot, you should have stood a millimeter this way. And it gives a story in the Gemara. Ma'aseh b'shnei bnei adam himru ze et ze. There's a story of two guys that made a bet. Two guys. Amru, they said, whoever is able to get Hillel to become angry, he told arba meot zuz. The other one has to pay him 400 zuz. Now that's a tremendous, tremendous amount of money. Amar echad mehem. So one of them said, Ani aknitenu. You know what? I'm taking that bet. I'm going to be able to get him angry. So now this Gemara tells us actually clearly, even though the other Gemara was also supposedly during Erev Shabbat, this is telling us clearly this happens Friday. It's not only is it Friday, it's late in the day. He's already taking a bath, washing his hair. He went by the house of Hillel. Amar, Mikan Hillel, Mikan Hillel. Who's Hillel? Where is he? So what does Hillel do? He doesn't say, hey, I'm busy, I'm taking a bath, I'm going to get ready for Shabbos. He gets his towel, he wraps himself up, and he goes to the door. Amar lo bini. And again, notice this. He doesn't say, what do you want? He says, bini, my son. Mata mevakesh. What can I do? What can I do for you? What are you looking for? Amar lo, she'ela yesh li lishol. He says, I have a question. Amar lo, bini sha'al. He said, my son, ask. Amar bitnei ma rashehem shel bavlim skalgulo. Why are the heads of the Babylonians like more oval? Amar lo. Now, it's a shtuyot kind of question. What do you mean? This is what you're bothering Hillel Hazaken with on Erev Shabbat? He was expecting like, what's your problem? Get out of here. And there he'd make his 400 zuz. Amar lo b'ni she'ela gedola sha'alta. You've asked a great question. Because their midwives are not smart. Meaning they were unable to properly help the head come out of the birth canal, and therefore it misshaped their heads. He waited another hour, this guy. He's not going to be losing out his 400 his zuz. Chazar v'amar went back to me and said, Mikan Hillel, Mikan Hillel. Who's Hillel? Evidently, Hillel's taking a nice long bath. Now, it doesn't mean an actual hour, probably just a little while. So once again, Hillel puts on his bathrobe or his towel. He comes to greet the man. Amar lo b'ni. What can I do for you? Marlo Shela yesh li lishol. I have a question. Marlo Sha'al b'ni. Ask me. Sha'al should be. Mitema eineihem shetamodiyim tutot. Why are the eyes of people from Talmud, why are they like slanted, narrow? Amarlo b'ni Shela gedola sha'alta. You've asked a very good question. He says, Mipnei shedarim ben hacholot. Because they live in very sandy areas. And let me get to the next screen. Move up. Sorry. So therefore, it was to protect their eyes. I guess I cut piece about. Sorry. This happens on a third time, and he asks again the same story. Who's Hillel? He comes wrapped up, and he says, "I have a question for you." He says, "But ask." Why are the feet of Africans so wide? Marlo b'ni. You've asked a great question. It says, they live in swampy areas and they need the extra foot space to be able to walk through the area. Amarlo, he said to him, so now this guy he's like at his wit's end. Because remember, he's not looking for answers. That's not what he's looking for. He's looking to get into an argument and make you a little angry. So he says, I have lots of questions. And I'm afraid maybe you're going to get angry at me. He's maybe using a little reverse psychology. So Hillel wraps himself up and sits down by front of this guy. Marlo, he said to him, all the questions you may have, ask. Marlo, Atahu Hillel Shekorin Otchan Nasi Israel. So my first question is, are you the Hillel, one that is the Nasi of Israel? Marlo Hen, I am, yes. Marlo Imatahu, Lo Yerbu Kamotcha Israel. If that's who you are, we should not have people like you in Israel. What? We shouldn't. Marlo B'ni Mipnei. Why not? Marlo, so he said to him, because of you, I just lost out on a chance to make 400 zuz, which, putting in perspective, was probably 2 years of salary, at least, if not more. So what's this? What are these stories with the Al Regel Achat and the Tavid and this trying to make him angry? What do we see in these stories that we get from Hillel? It leads us to this first of these 3 Mishnayot. Look at it again. Now that we have heard these little stories, and by the way, there's so much more. There's many, many more stories. And for those of you who have more interest, when you learn Gemara and Talmud Bavli, and you come across what's called Agadata, which is stories, legend, lore, to understand more in depth about it, the first place you look is in the back of the Gemara, is the commentary called the Maharsha. Maharsha gives commentary. There's also a standalone set of svarim called En Yaakov, which has the Maharsha and other commentaries on Agadata in the Gemara, and it makes for fascinating reading, because sometimes I'll have this, very often it's a team will say to me, I don't get it. Here's the story that tells the Gemara. It's impossible. It couldn't be. I said, you're right, it's impossible. So what are they telling us the story for? Because it's not a story, it's a mashal, it's a parable. Very often the stories that are told in the Gemara are meant as a parable. They're meant to teach us something, and that what the Maharsha does very often will expand on that. So now with these stories, let's take a look again. Let's read the Mishnah again for the middle. Hillel Omer, top line. You should be like this from the students of Aaron. Ohev shalom v'rodev shalom. You should always love peace and chase after peace. Ohev et you should love people. Mukaravan leTorah, and the Jews, you should try to bring them closer to the Torah. Does it mean also non-Jews? Not necessarily. We won't get to that today. So now we can understand how he comes up with this. Is his life's motto, his mission in life is love. He wants to show that love. Here you have the situation, especially the second story, where on multiple occasions his Erev Shabbat preparations are getting interrupted. It's not like he's sweeping the floor. He's going to Rami Levy to buy some chicken. He's already getting ready for Shabbat. It's, as they say in Chinese, it's right there. It's coming up. And now he's fine. He's very calm, very cool, very collected. And not only is he could very easily have said, look, great question. Do me a favor. Get back to me next week. We'll talk. He doesn't do that. He tries to engage this person. He does successfully engage him. So I want to talk now for a few minutes about this particular Mishnah. Don't think I have any more on here. Oh, I do. Oh, yeah, I do. I wanted to show you one more thing, and then we'll get it off of screen share. Okay. This is a Mishnah that many of you are familiar with. Mishnah at the beginning of Masechet Peah. It's said in the morning before Shacharit. Actually, the Mishnah on Peah comes before this. Is the Elud Dvarim Shein Lahem Shiur, and there are things that have no set amount. This is the second part of this. Elud Dvarim Shadam Ochel Peiroteim Balom Hazeh. It got mixed up. I see. Hold on. It messed up the Hebrew because I did something here. These are the following things, the things that you have benefit from them in this world, and the ultimate reward, and the ultimate reward is in the next world. Kibud avim, honoring your parents, milut chasadim, doing acts of chesed, hashkamat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'arvit, getting to shul, whether it means getting to shul early in the morning and evening, or it means actually setting up the shul, hachnasat orchim, bringing guests into your home, uvikur cholim, and visiting the sick, hachnasat kala, paying for a wedding, vayatamet, also being involved in bringing someone to their final resting place, ve'iyun tefillah, learning and understanding your tefillah better, and now, of course, the kicker, ha'avad shalom ben adam lachaveroho, bringing peace between your friends, uvein ish leishto, and between a man and husband and a wife, the Talmud Torah keneged kula, and learning Torah is equivalent to all of these. Shalom, interestingly enough, is mentioned as being one of those things, seeking out peace, making peace between people. Hopefully, you've all had a chance in your lives, whether it's within your own families, outside your families, friends, people you don't even know, that somehow you were able to insert yourself into something, that you brought peace between people, and hopefully not the opposite. If you have been involved in yourselves in causing pirud or separation, arguments, now's the time, especially to do your best to try to repair that. It's nothing to do with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, nothing. We're way before that. It has to do with making sure Am Yisrael is protected and that it's making peace and not causing more problems. An interesting point. Did you ever notice, we mentioned shalom a lot in our davening and in other areas, but it's always the last thing. It's the last thing in Birkat HaMazon. It's the last thing in Birkat HaKohanim. It's the last thing in Shmona Esrei. It's the last thing in almost everything we talk about. It's always the end, because it teaches a very important lesson. Oh, it's also the very last mission of all Mishnayot. That the only utensil God found to hold bracha or blessing is peace. Why is it always the last thing? It's teaching us, I think, a very important lesson. You can have your health, you can have parnasa, you can have everything you daven for, but if you don't have a sense of peace, now that just doesn't mean you're not in a fight with somebody. That's not what peace is. That's just a lack of belligerence. It means that you're calm, you're at peace in inner peace, external peace. Then everything that you have is just not as useful and helpful to you as it can be if you had peace as well. We know that if a person is in turmoil, whether it's an emotional turmoil, physical, God forbid they're physically sick also, either way, it affects the whole life. You know, there are many people, especially now, whose lives have been turned upside down, whether they're from the north, from the south, people whose families, wherever they may be, have family in the army, in and out of the army, God forbid, shalom neda, who've lost people already, unfortunately many, that the idea of shalom, and I'm not talking about we have peace in Gaza and we have our chatufim back. I'm not talking about that kind of peace. I'm talking about the inner peace right now. Is so elusive for so many right now. It's scary. I was sitting last night at a simcha, and I'll tell you about that for a reason in a minute. And the guy sitting next to me said, "Do you think that in Israel we have enough mental health professionals to deal with all the mental health issues that are coming as a result of this war?" I said, "We will." He didn't understand what I meant. I said, "In my humble opinion, we don't. Nowhere near it right now, because I don't think our country is necessarily at that point, because there's so many people who need so much help. But there are people who are out there, good people who are in the process of getting trained and learning more and maybe put their learning into practice to help others." Just want to just digress for a second, give you a little bit of good among the very dark at this time. I had mentioned more than likely last year, just over a year ago, somebody I work with, his daughter, and some of you had been saying her name also, his wife and his daughter had been in a car accident, a terrible car accident. The mother broke her pelvis, and the daughter, shalom neda, she was in very bad shape. Ad kadei kach, they didn't think she was going to even survive. Now, this man, we worked together, we weren't particularly close, but I felt, and they'd taken the child to Schneider, and I felt a need to go there, to be with him. I messaged him. I said, "Is there anything you need? And would you mind if I came?" He says, "I don't need anything. If you come, that'll be awesome." I couldn't do anything except be there for him. And I got there. I didn't see the girl because she was hooked up to a million things and all wrapped up. I was there for him. And he had a horrible migraine. He already suffered from migraines. And of course, the stress of seeing his daughter, who knew what was going to happen from literally minute to minute. They didn't know if she was going to make it, just to be there with him. Long story short, I was with him there. I was later during Shikum when she was going through rehab, and I met her then. She's partially bandaged and all. This happened, I think it was a year and 2 months ago. And last night, I had this hoot of going to Nokdim, which is right next to Tekoa in the Gush, and to dance at her bat mitzvah. Her mother dancing. had a broken pelvis, the daughter, the girl who had surgery after surgery and mental health involvement, everything you can imagine, you would never know, ever, that she had gone through something. Her name is Noah, Nun Vav Ayin He, and they say, and now in retrospect, the name stood for Nisim V'Niflaot Asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that miracles and wonders Hashem did for her. And it's literally a walking miracle. You know, they use the expression, "Oh, it's a miracle." This is a mamish a miracle. I know the situation, what it was, and to walk away from that and to be able to celebrate last night in this bat mitzvah was amazing. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to take it off the screen share. Let's talk about this Mishne for a few minutes. Of all the people, he could say, Hillel could very easily said, "Be like Aharon," right? Because we know that one of the tchunot, one of the characteristics of Aharon was he was an Ohev Shalom, Rodev Shalom himself. He always was trying to make peace, and we'll see what that means in a minute, how he did that. But it's first we have to understand why say be like the students of Aharon. Be like Aaron. He's the quintessential seeker of truth, of peace. So let's say you take a person, think of a great Rav, and you refer to him very often as the Talmid Chacham, which you would think is a slap in the face, because the Talmid is a student. Talmid is a student. You'd say he's a Chacham. Now, I'm not talking about Sfaradim who call the rabbis, they call him Chacham. I'm talking about, you call him a Chacham, why Talmid Chacham? Because a real Chacham is always a Talmid. Because a real wise individual realizes and understands that he or she is always learning. We will see it later on in Pirke Avot. It will say, Ezehu Chacham halomed mikol adam. Who is considered wise? Is someone who can learn from everybody, and you can learn from everybody. I'm not talking about adults. I'm not talking teens. I'm talking literally everybody, even little children. Even as Shlomo HaMelech says in Mishne, go to the ant and become wise. What does that mean? Eventually we'll deal with that. But so what does it mean to be of the Talmidim of Aharon? To be like Talmidav shel Aharon? It doesn't mean just to be like Aharon. It means that we always have to always be like students. We have to be learning, and just like learning implies proactive, so too you have to seek out ways to bring peace among people. So what does it mean that Aaron used to, was this big Ohev Shalom and Rodev Shalom? So what did he used to do? It was, Gemara tells us, and Josh tells us also interesting stories with Aaron. I'm just going to mention the one, is that when he knew that there were two people that were fighting, he would go to one, let's say it was say Shmaya and Avtayon. So you go to Shmaya and say, listen, I got to tell you, I was just talking to Avtayon. He really feels bad. He really wants to make peace. Then I go to Avtayon and say, listen, I was just talking to Shmaya. He feels bad about the whole thing. He really wants to make peace. And they both think that the other one wants to make peace. They make peace. He also brought a lot of, he was like the quintessential marriage counselor. Husbands and wives would go to him, not Moshe, would go to him for help with their marriage when they had problems. He would bring peace between husbands and wives. And that's why when he died, let's go further. When Moshe dies at the end of Sefer, at the end of Sefer Dvarim, it said that that they Bnei Israel. Let me get the pasuk. I'll read it to you. I'm done. Okay. Let's see. Oops. Nice. Come back to this. Okay. Screen share. Okay. If you take a look, pasuk Zayin over here. It says Moshe ben Me'av Esrim Shana b'moto. Moshe was 120 years old when he died. Lo chatayino, lo naslecho. He was still full of vigor. Vayivku v'nei Yisrael Moshe ba'arvot Moav 30 yom. It says Bnei Israel cried, or they mourned Moshe for 30 days in the Avot Moab, which is just on the other side of the Jordan River, where they're going to cross into Israel. Vayitemu v'mei v'chi evel Moshe, and then the days of mourning for Moshe came to an end. Notice the words here. Vayivku b'nei Israel. Bnei Israel mourned. However, when Aaron dies, the pasuk says, "Vayivku Aaron 30 yom kol beit Israel." all the Jews mourn. It doesn't say Bnei Israel, it says Kol Bnei Israel. What's the difference? Or Kol Beit Yisrael by why by Moshe does it say? You would think the opposite, because you would think that the relationship with Moshe was much different than with Aaron. They answer like this. What were the differences between their tafkidim, between their jobs, between Moshe and Aaron, among many? I said that Aaron was the seeker of peace. He made peace between husbands and wives. He made peace between friends, made peace between enemies. What was Moshe's job? We just saw last week in Parshat Yitro, we see the extension this week in Mishpatim, the whole concept of justice. That we know that Yitro goes to his son-in-law Moshe and says, listen, you're going to go out of your mind. These people are coming to you with all their shilas. You got to set up a court system, which, by the way, is one of the 7 Noahide laws, also to have a court system. And Moshe accepts it, and he puts it into practice. Moshe was the ultimate arbiter when it came to cases. Many times, we don't think of these terms because, we just picture the Jews wandering in the desert, but there were money cases. Some guy hurt somebody's animal. He maybe took something, wasn't his. And Moshe had to make decisions that people weren't always happy with, right? If I went to court and I went before Moshe and he found me guilty and the other guy innocent or whatever it is, and I have to pay him, so I'm not going to be so happy with him necessarily. I accept it as the halacha, but maybe not so happy. So he engendered a little bit of distance between the person and Moshe. Aaron's the other end of the extreme, the other end of this spectrum. He's the one who's bringing people closer. He's bringing Avot. So because there were people who still had this little twist inside of them about Moshe Rabbeinu, not to, God forbid, take anything away from Moshe. So it says, Vayivku b'nei Yisrael. But by Aaron, it says, Vayivku kol b'nei Yisrael, because everyone felt bad that he had died, because everyone loved him, even to a certain degree, even more than Moshe Rabbeinu. I'll tell you a very fast story. I mentioned this story of Yitro and Moshe. I've told this in the past, but I think the person in the story, it's his yahrzeit coming up. I had a student, when I first started teaching officially, 25 years ago. So the first class, the second class I had actually, it was 5th grade, and I was teaching Parashat Yitro. That's what the school was at. For their class, they were learning Yitro. And in the parasha, as I just said to you, Yitro comes to Moshe and tells him, look, you got to set up a court system. You can't handle this all by yourself. And Yitro justifies it by using 2 words, navol tibol. It's a bilbu. You're going to go crazy. You have to do this. So I had this one kid, Jonathan, in the class. And Jonathan couldn't stop laughing because he thought those 2 words, navol. He kept going, navol tibol, navol tibol. He's 10 years old. Navol tibol, navol tibol. I said, Jonathan, you are never going to forget those words the rest of your life. Fast forward about 15 years, and about 15 years ago, no, less, 13 years ago, I was standing in the old city, and in a distance, I hear the following, Rabbi Shanalov, Navol Tibol. This kid was already coming in his gap year. He was in 5th grade. I met him. Now he's already post-high school. And I ran over to him, a big hug, and he said, you told me I'd never forget, and I never forgot. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly the circumstances. A few years ago, he passed away. But I mentioned it because of the story about the mentioning in Parshat Yitro. Okay, so here's the deal. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, we have to talk a little bit more about how is the shalom so important. We also have to understand, what does it mean, ohev shalom v'rodev shalom? Maybe it should be the opposite. Why do you have to love it first? Maybe you should just try to do it, and also it comes naturally, maybe by seeking it out. And is ohevat habriot direct connection to the first half of the Mishne? Is it a separate standalone statement? So Bezrat Hashem, we'll deal with that next week. In the meantime, have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for doing this on Zoom. And as far as I know, next week we'll be back in person and Zoom. Have a great day.